Welcome back to English 1010E at Southern Utah University. In this unit, we'll learn about writing a personal narrative. A personal narrative is a story, and it's a true story. And it's a true story about a personal experience that you have had. The goal of writing a personal narrative is to feel more comfortable expressing yourself in academic language and to learn the structure of a general academic writing document. So what kind of personal experience do you write about for a personal narrative? There's lots of options. Here's some things to be thinking about. Maybe you want to take inspiration from school. Have you ever had a challenging project or had an interesting interaction with a classmate or teacher? What about your childhood, a favorite memory that you had? A birthday party? Other kinds of experiences. Maybe you learned how to swim or learned how to play a musical instrument. You could write about that experience. Or think about your experience with media. Have you ever read a book or watched a movie that had a powerful effect on you? Think about your relationships. Is there an important person that had a large impact on your life? Or think about travel. Did you ever take a memorable trip? Maybe something really good or something really terrible happened to you on that trip. You could also think about everyday life decisions. Have you ever had to make a really difficult choice? How do you feel about that choice? Also think about other kinds of interests you had, working in a group, playing on a team. These are all sources of inspiration for a personal narrative. The goal is to think about your personal life and things that you could learn by reflecting on your life. Here's some of the elements of a personal narrative. First, let's start with plot. Plot is the story. What is the story that you want to tell? It can't be a long story. In a personal narrative that's only a couple pages long, it needs to be a very short story, but a story that you can draw an interesting idea from. Who are the characters? You are obviously one of the characters. There may be other characters involved in your story. Think also about the setting. What is the time and the place of the story? Is this something that happened recently to you? Did it happen at home or at school? Did it happen when you were younger, when you were traveling somewhere? Also think about the conflict. What is the problem that the story presents? Was it a problem with another person or an internal struggle you felt as you tried to make a decision? Lastly, you also want to think about the theme. The theme is the lesson or the main idea that you've learned from this story and that you hope to use to teach you and others about the value of your experience. All of these 5 elements work together to create an effective personal narrative. Let's also talk about the structure or the organization of the personal narrative. How should you organize your ideas as you write your document? Generally, we can think of it as being 3 sections. The first section is your introduction. In the introduction, you will introduce the characters. That's probably you and maybe some other people. You'll also establish the setting. Now, you don't have to directly say, here are the characters in the story. It's me and my mother. But instead, you could share and describe a situation in which you and your mother are interacting at home, which establishes the setting and the characters. Then, later through the essay, you're going to explore the conflict. This means you need to identify the problem. Was there some kind of argument maybe between you and your mother? How did the argument start? What is the argument about? How do you feel in the argument? How does your mother feel in the argument? What effect is the argument having on your relationship? You want to explore this relationship and the interaction between the character and between the problem. Finally, at the end, you want to highlight a lesson. Arrive at a conclusion to the problem. Perhaps in this story about an argument between you and your mother, maybe you realize something that you didn't understand before about your mother's perspective, and you better value the insight that she gives you. Or alternatively, at the end of the story, you and your mother disagreed so strongly that you still feel like you have difficulty communicating with her to this day. Whatever the conclusion is, you want to reflect on that experience and then suggest some lessons that can be learned from the problem. One of the lessons could be that we need to listen to our parents because they have valuable advice for us. Or maybe the lesson is that we need to better explain our feelings to others. And then when we don't communicate with them well, they don't understand our point of view, and it creates tension between family members. Whatever it is, you try to draw some kind of lesson from that experience, and that becomes the concluding part of your personal narrative. So we start with an introduction where we establish the characters and the setting, we explore the problem and how it affects the characters, and then we arrive at a solution or a conclusion and draw a lesson. Let's talk about some student examples, and I'll post these on Canvas so that you can read them in more detail. In one of the examples, we'll read about a young woman from Southern Utah University who describes an experience she had with her grandfather. This happened in Southern Utah during her teenage years. And in the personal narrative, she describes one day when she was taking care of the cattle, or the cows, with her grandfather when they were riding on horses. The main conflict in the story arises when her horse is scared by a rattlesnake, and a big problem happens. At the end of this story, the young woman draws a lesson about the importance of courage, but also on remembering advice that her grandfather gave her. Here's another example. In this one, a student describes an experience he had in high school when he went backpacking in the Rocky Mountains with some of his friends. It was a long hike where they camped for several days, and during this experience one of the boys gets lost from the rest of the group, and they try searching for him. At the conclusion of the personal narrative, the writer describes a lesson about regret and guilt and loss. Whatever you choose for your personal narrative, here's a recommended schedule for completing the task. First, you'll want to start with the writing fluency task. Explore an experience that you think might be a good topic for your personal narrative. You can always change it in the next couple of days following this if you didn't like the experience that you wrote about for your writing fluency task, but this is a good place to start. You'll use that experience to write your first draft. You want to make sure that that first draft includes all sections of the structure: an introduction to the characters and the setting, an exploration of the conflict or problem in the story and how it affects the characters, and then a conclusion to the problem with a lesson about what you have learned from that experience. Then you'll go ahead and submit your first draft to Canvas. In the next week, you will review that draft with the tutor and get feedback and look at ways that you can improve your personal narrative so that the story is clearer, the lesson is clearer, but also that your language and your use of academic English makes it easier for the reader to understand your message. When you have revised your writing, you'll submit your final draft to Canvas, and that 2-week unit will be finished. At any point during this process, don't hesitate to contact your instructor through Canvas or email. I really look forward to reading your personal narratives and exploring with you lessons that you can learn from your own personal experiences.